Edmonton. Taking part in a blanket exercise, participants struggled to maintain their footing as the blankets they stood upon were systematically pulled away, symbolizing the effect colonization had on the Indigenous people of Canada. The exercise was a demonstration of some of the experiential training all Children's Services staff will undergo as part of a new Indigenous cultural understanding framework. Participants take part in a blanket exercise at the announcement Tuesday of a new Indigenous cultural understanding framework that will see all Children's Services staff in Alberta trained in Indigenous history to better understand the cultural context in their work with Indigenous families. Claire Theobald, Star Metro Edmonton. It makes you think, and perhaps even challenges some of your untested and unconscious beliefs or assumptions, said Danielle Larrivee, Alberta's Minister of Children's Services, at an announcement of the framework on Tuesday. These kinds of conversations and experiences are crucial for a stronger understanding of Indigenous cultural perspectives that will ultimately help us create stronger children, families and communities across the province. Government interactions with Indigenous families have a long and troubled history in the province. The effects of colonialization, including a residential school system and the 60s scoop that saw Indigenous children torn from their families and communities, are playing out today through intergenerational trauma. Article continued below. The present often contains echoes in the past. Larrivee said, "We see this truth in systemic discrimination faced by Indigenous people. We see it in the number and the quality of socioeconomic opportunities. We hear it in the testimonies of survivors of the 60s scoop, the residential schools and in the experiences of generations that followed. We see and hear it, and it is up to us to come to terms with it." Read more. NDP government releases plan to combat racism in Alberta. Edmonton official apologizes for plan to cancel courtesy parking for drivers with disabilities. Quick action demanded after opioid deaths of 12 youth in Careth. New Indigenous cultural understanding framework will see all Children's Services staff educated in these historical, cultural contexts in the hope it will better inform decisions and end a painful chapter in Alberta's history as the government works towards reconciliation with Indigenous people. By taking deliberate steps today to acknowledge and learn from this past, we can help forge a new history, one of healing, as we walk together on this journey, Larrivee said. Article continued below. Indigenous children make up around 70% of those interacting with Children's Services in Alberta, Larrivee said, a percentage that is vastly greater than their proportion of the overall population. By learning about Indigenous history and incorporating Indigenous people and perspectives with every step, Children's Services staff hope to achieve better, healthier outcomes for Indigenous children and their families. Holly Belland, a manager with a Child Intervention Division of Children's Services who was a frontline caseworker for nearly 20 years, said after taking the training she wishes she knew then what she knows now. "I dealt with what I was seeing, and what I didn't see was the history," said Belland. As more of her colleagues take the training, which is developed in partnership with local Indigenous people to ensure it is applicable in the regions and with the populations they serve, Belland said she has seen a profound shift. "I can see the changes and I can see the shifts, and it's everywhere," Belland said. Part of the framework is measuring perceptions and outcomes to see if the lessons are being applied as they interact with Indigenous families. Adam North Pigan, president of the 60s Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta, who is himself a survivor of the 60s Scoop, where tens of thousands of Indigenous children across Canada were separated from their families and adopted into non-Indigenous families, said he is hopeful this training will bring about meaningful change. "I think it's important for Indigenous people in Alberta to have the opportunity to be able to provide input and to be part of developing a plan of action going forward. We need to be a part of child welfare reform," said North Pigan, in an interview with Star Metro Wednesday. Children's Services is expected to release a new public action plan on Thursday, which is supposed to improve the safety and well-being of all children who interact with Children's Services. North Pigan said he believes Indigenous Albertans can play a big role in bringing about those positive changes. Claire Theobald is an Edmonton-based reporter who covers crime in the courts. Follow her on Twitter, @ClaireTheobald.